2007, Piney Grove Community, Mississippi. On July 2nd, a woman named Felicia Warren disappears without noise or spectacle. No struggle is witnessed. No alarm is raised in real time. Her absence arrives quietly, noticed only after hours begin to stack into a shape that feels wrong. Her vehicle will later be found miles away, locked, stationary, untouched by urgency. Inside are the things she never left behind: her purse, her keys, her medication. The road where it rests cuts through rural ground that keeps its own secrets, a place where distances are short but answers remain far apart. At first, the details do not conflict. They simply do not connect. Family accounts overlap but fail to close. Timelines align until they do not. The land itself appears unchanged, holding no visible disturbance, no obvious interruption. Only later will investigators realize how close the truth had been all along, and how long it had been watching from beneath the surface. This story unfolds slowly, layer by layer, as records age and silence hardens. If you follow cases that refuse to resolve on schedule, stay with this one, and consider subscribing as the investigation begins to take shape. Felicia Warren was 40 years old when she was last seen on July 2, 2007. She lived in the Piney Grove community of Pontotoc County, Mississippi. According to reports later consolidated through NamUs, she vanished on a day that carried no formal marker of crisis. There was no storm, no public disturbance, no documented conflict that morning. She was expected to travel, to be picked up, to move from one place to another as planned. When that plan failed, concern began to assemble in fragments. The initial report described a narrow window of last contact. Family members retraced expected routes. Calls were placed and unanswered. When her copper-colored 1999 Chevrolet Blazer was located near the Randolph community, it introduced a fixed point into an otherwise drifting timeline. The vehicle was locked. Inside were Felicia's personal effects, including medication her family stated she never went without. There were no visible signs of forced entry. No blood. No indication the vehicle had been abandoned in haste. Law enforcement documented the scene as found. Photographs were taken. The surrounding area was surveyed. Waldo Road did not offer immediate context beyond its isolation. It was a place someone passed through, not a place someone stayed. Investigators noted the absence of witnesses and the lack of surveillance, typical of rural stretches in 2007. The vehicle became both the strongest evidence and the quietest object in the case. Early interviews focused on family and close contacts. One name surfaced repeatedly: David Neal Cox, Felicia's brother-in-law and the last known person to see her alive. At the time, suspicion did not equal proof. Statements were recorded, compared, and archived, without physical evidence tying a person to a crime. The file remained procedural rather than prosecutorial. Search efforts followed the patterns available at the time. Ground searches were conducted in surrounding areas, guided by geography rather than intelligence. Volunteers and officers moved through wooded parcels and open land, scanning for disruption. The terrain offered dense brush, uneven soil, and long stretches that appeared undisturbed. Nothing surfaced that could be logged as actionable. Records show that investigators faced a familiar limitation: absence. No confirmed crime scene, no recovered remains, no forensic material that could be tested or challenged. The case did not close, but it did slow. Notes accumulated, maps were marked and revisited, leads aged without resolution. For those watching this case unfold years later, consider what detail stands out to you so far, and leave a comment about where you think the investigation first lost momentum. As weeks passed, the disappearance settled into a long-term classification. Files were maintained, periodic reviews occurred, but without new information, the case remained suspended between suspicion and stasis. The land around Piney Grove continued to change. Subtly, ownership shifted, structures were added, vegetation cleared, while the question of Felicia Warren's fate stayed unanswered, waiting beneath the surface. Time altered the case without advancing it. Records thinned as paper yellowed and digital systems replaced older logs. When investigators revisited the file, they noted small inconsistencies that had once seemed irrelevant. A radio transmission time that did not match a patrol report. A search log that listed weather conditions different from those recalled by volunteers. None of it constituted evidence. Together, they suggested drift. Search documentation from 2007 described broad sweeps rather than targeted excavation. Teams moved along accessible routes, favoring clearings and edges over dense interior ground. Compasses were used, but not all readings aligned cleanly with mapped bearings. Officers later recalled brief interference on handheld radios in low-lying areas near tree cover. At the time, it was attributed to terrain. The notes remained unremarkable until reread years later, when the same areas appeared again in unrelated files. Footprints were logged once, shallow impressions near a soft shoulder off a secondary path, but they were ruled inconclusive. Rain followed that evening. The marks were not preserved. In subsequent reviews, the photographs showed impressions that seemed to lead nowhere, ending abruptly at firmer ground. No follow-up was conducted. The assumption was simple: incidental traffic. As years passed, the land itself became a variable. Property lines shifted. A parcel once overgrown was cleared. A structure was built. What had been inaccessible brush in 2007 was now open soil. Investigators noted this transformation only in passing, during routine checks that compared satellite imagery across time. No cause was assigned. The images were filed in interviews conducted much later. Some participants mentioned a sense of disorientation during the original searches. Not fear, not threat, a difficulty in aligning direction with expectation. These recollections were subjective and unrecorded at the time. When contrasted against the written logs, they created a quiet friction between memory and documentation. There were also letters, not confessions, not at first. Communications filtered through attorneys, constrained by privilege and timing. They referenced locations obliquely with language that suggested familiarity rather than precision. Investigators could not act on implication alone. Without coordinates, without consent, the file remained sealed. Technology improved. Ground-penetrating radar became accessible to regional agencies. Cadaver dogs were trained with greater specificity. Yet none of these tools could be deployed without a reason to deploy them. The case waited for permission to move. In hindsight, the strange element was not an event but an absence of disturbance. No alarm triggered when it should have. No visible scar on the land where one would later be found. The ground kept its shape. The records kept their order. Only time introduced noise. Static accumulating in the margins. If this unfolding tension holds your attention, consider leaving a like as the story presses closer to what remained hidden. Felicia Warren was not defined by the manner in which she disappeared, but by the routines she maintained before she did. Records and family statements describe a woman anchored to predictability. She kept her medication close. She maintained contact. When plans were made, they were followed or explained. This consistency became one of the quiet markers investigators returned to when assessing what did not align. On July 2, 2007, Felicia was expected to travel to Oxford. The arrangement involved family, coordination, and timing. When she was not where she was supposed to be, concern did not emerge from silence alone, but from deviation. Those who knew her recognized absence as behavior, not accident. Her vehicle told a similar story. Locked, orderly, nothing missing, nothing added. The presence of her purse and keys suggested she had exited the vehicle without intent to leave it behind, or that she had not exited it at all. The medication inside carried more weight than any object. Family stated she never went anywhere without it. This detail remained consistent across statements and years. Photographs of Felicia show a woman in midlife, expression neutral, posture unremarkable. There is no visual cue that anticipates violence or flight. Investigators often noted how little her appearance suggested vulnerability. That observation did not translate into explanation. What her daughter grew into adulthood without resolution. Family members aged alongside the file. Holidays passed with an absence that had no physical boundary. The land where Felicia once lived changed hands. Structures appeared where there had been brush. Life continued around a question that had not been answered. Letters arrived much later, filtered through legal process. One would eventually contain an apology. It acknowledged harm without describing it. It offered regret without mechanism. For Felicia's family, it reopened what had never closed. Relief and disturbance occupied the same space. Investigators noted that the narrative of Felicia's final day relied entirely on others. There was no recorded statement from her after that morning. No confirmed sighting. No transaction. Her story ended in third person. In reviewing the case, detectives emphasized restraint. They avoided reconstructing her final moments beyond what evidence allowed. Speculation, they noted, would not restore accuracy. What remained was a portrait drawn from absence, shaped by routine interrupted. Felicia Warren did not vanish into wilderness. She disappeared into familiarity family land, known roads, expected plans. That proximity made the silence heavier, not lighter. It suggested not randomness, but design. The case moved again only when time ran out for someone else. In November 2021, days before his execution at the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman for the 2010 murder of his wife, David Neal Cox waived attorney-client privilege. Through his lawyers, he disclosed information he had not provided for 14 years. The timing altered everything. The disclosure arrived after consequence had already been sealed. Prosecutors received a letter and a hand-drawn map. The language was direct. The drawing was simple. It marked a location on land once owned by Felicia's family in Pontotoc County. Investigators compared the indicated site against satellite imagery from 2007 and from the present day. The images did not contradict the claim. They complicated it. What had been dense brush at the time of her disappearance was now cleared ground, partially cultivated. With a home built nearby in 2016, the location itself introduced a contradiction that had not existed before: proximity. The marked site was less than 20 feet from where a current owner lived. It was visible from the road now, but it would not have been then. In 2007, the area had been obscured by trees and undergrowth. The land had changed without revealing what it held. A coordinated search was authorized. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed by Mississippi State University personnel. Cadaver dogs were added. The process followed a controlled sequence. Radar identified 2 anomalies. One resolved into tree roots, the other did not. Its shape and depth were consistent with a grave excavation proceeded in measured increments, 6 inches at a time. Investigators looked for soil disturbance, for shovel marks, for an outline that did not belong to the surrounding ground. After hours of removal and reassessment, remains were uncovered. The location matched the map. The timeline collapsed. Metadata from the original case file was search grids from 2007 showed the area had not been excavated. Radio logs placed teams nearby but not within the specific parcel. The absence of a search at that exact point was not an error of negligence, but of scope. Without cause to dig, the ground remained intact. The discovery reframed earlier inconsistencies. The locked vehicle, the medication left behind, the absence of struggle. Each detail aligned not with disappearance, but with containment. Investigators noted that without the confession, the site would likely have remained undisturbed indefinitely. The confession did not include a method. No cause of death was described. The motive remained unclear. What was provided was location. And location was enough to end the search but not the questions. Forensic identification was initiated. The recovery allowed for burial. It did not allow for reconstruction beyond what the soil permitted. The land gave up its contents without commentary. As this new evidence reshaped the case, consider leaving a comment on what detail you believe mattered most and finally bringing the truth to the surface. Felicia Warren's remains were confirmed in December 2021, 14 years after she vanished. The resolution was procedural and final in some respects, yet the case retained its cold ambiguity. Cause of death, method and motive were never fully disclosed. The Earth had concealed its secret for more than a decade, then relinquished it only when the last person who held the knowledge chose to speak. The land itself, once obscured by brush, now open and cultivated, served as a silent witness. Each layer removed during excavation was a revelation and a reminder that proximity does not equal knowledge. Investigators and family alike confronted the weight of absence, of time that can alter context and perception, leaving questions unresolved even after discovery. Letters and statements, filtered through legal channels, offered apology and acknowledgement, but no closure beyond identification. For Felicia's daughter and remaining family, the act of locating the body allowed for burial, ritual, and mourning, yet the sense of loss persisted, shaped by the delay, by the quiet years in which answers did not arrive, even as the forensic process confirmed her identity. Subtle traces of uncertainty lingered, patterns of movement, minor inconsistencies in earlier logs, and uncorroborated accounts from 2007 continued to provoke speculation. The terrain itself, now altered by human development, retains shadows of what once lay hidden beneath. For those who follow cases like this, the story remains instructive. Truth can emerge in fragments, and sometimes the land remembers more than the living. Consider subscribing to witness the unfolding of cases that defy immediate understanding. And in the end, the silence of Piney Grove holds its own answer. Sometimes, disappearance leaves a mark deeper than confession ever could.